Hello and welcome to Pest in Class, Expert Voices in Pest Management. I'm your host, Amanda Salvatore, and on today's episode, we have Dini Miller, an entomologist at Virginia Tech. We discussed her discoveries from field research conducted in public housing and the significance of businesses effectively communicating issues they encounter within the home. We also had a little fun along the way. Let's get into it. Dini Miller, you are an entomologist with Virginia Tech, and today we are discussing how field research can impact the pest industry. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Oh, I am happy to have you. I have to say, for those who are at home listening, Dini right now is sitting in front of a cloth, but just all of the bed bugs that
Yeah,
are pictured. They're not real. They're just
right.
images, but it's a brilliant background. I'm
It's
impressed.
a tablecloth with bed bugs all over it. Don't you have one? Doesn't everybody?
Doesn't everybody have that?
Yeah.
I gotta say, a tablecloth with bed bugs, better than sheets with bed bugs on it.
Oh, that's
I
a
would,
good point.
yeah. So,
Oh.
so
It'd be an excellent dust ruffle if you put
yes,
bed bugs all around.
yeah.
Wow.
You know
That's a
what,
good
Dini?
idea.
Let's pause the podcast right here. Let's go into business. Let's start making bed skirt ruffles. I'm here for it.
That's perfect.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you again. I'm really excited. You are a character. I'm so excited to have you here. First and foremost, a little get to know you with an icebreaker. What book has impacted you the most?
Well, the one that started me down the path that I've been on now for like the last 30 years, honestly, and this was a big deal, was The Flight of the Iguana. Okay, and that was written by David Quammen. And I come from a strange background, but I started going to UCLA when I was probably about 26 years old. And it just so happened I lived at my father's house for the first time in my life. And this book was there. I read it and it just changed my perspective on everything. So it was all about Darwin's visit to the Galapagos and the flight of the iguana. He talks about the fact that he picked up one of these marine iguanas. This is one that swims around in the ocean, very unusual for iguanas to do that, and flung it over his head and threw it into the water to see that it actually could swim and everything. Of course, Darwin was an evolutionary biologist, and that started me down the path of evolutionary biology. Even though I had just started at UCLA and I'd been going to community college at night for like 6 years and stuff, and I most transferable units into geography ecosystems, but that's what made me realize I was truly a biologist, is reading that book. And then that kind of has guided me since.
I love that so much. I was just going
Yeah.
to say Harry Potter, you know? And here you are being like, listen, there is some interesting stuff out there.
Oh,
That I will
really?
have to check that. I recognized the name of it. I was like, I've definitely heard of this. I'm going to have to check it out because I'm going to need to see what happens after he flings an iguana into the ocean. I'm assuming they swim.
Well, the marine iguana is a very special iguana in the fact that it swims in salt water. That's not something we typically see in lizards, in reptiles and things like that, that they're in salt water. And these guys have just adapted to live in a saltwater environment, and then they come up onto the rocks of the various islands they live on and snort the salt out of their nose. And I
Sure.
still haven't done it yet, but I might do it this year, as I have to get out there and be on those rocks with the marine iguanas as they're snorting the salt out of their nose. That's been a life dream.
Oh, I'm very excited for you. So, Dini, let's get into it. How did you, and you kind of went into it a little bit with this book. It's a great segue. How did you find yourself in academia and the pest world?
Well, I never would have dreamed, if you'd have told me when I was 20 years old that my life was going to be about cockroaches and bed bugs, I would have told you you were out of your mind. So, right out of high school, I was working at department stores and then worked for a buying office and things like that. but ended up going to community college at night. But when I got into, I had been a good student in high school and stuff, but with my life and everything, my last year was not the best. But ended up going to community college and was just fascinated by everything. And I was an excellent student going at night. So I had a 4.0. And then at one point, my father's wife, okay, and I didn't know my father very well, and he'd been married multiple times too. She actually sent me an application to UCLA. And I didn't want to disappoint her or anything. So I applied for entry into UCLA. And I had all these transferable units and a 4.0 in community college. And the fact that I was 26 years old, who knew, but I qualified as a non traditional student. So I was able to get into UCLA and did work study and got all kinds of, scholarships and stuff like that. So basically, the state of California paid for my education out there. And while I was studying geography ecosystems, which I can't tell you how much I've used that in my travels all over the world, so that was the perfect thing to do. But I realized I really loved animals and biodiversity and evolutionary biology and all of this, that I should have been a biologist. But the way things turned out, I ended up taking two field courses in biology where you actually went out to the Mojave Desert and studied something out there. And I studied these beetles, and I didn't know anything about what kind they were or what have you. But I came back and went to the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles and got them identified by a gentleman who was kind of a famous biologist at that time there. But I asked him, I said, hey, can I volunteer here or something? And he said, well, no, I don't need volunteers, but what about Dr. Art Evans? And he was the guy who had put together the first insect zoo in California. So I ended up volunteering at the insect zoo, which turned out to be fascinating. And Art Evans and I became friends and actually went and saw, traveled a little bit together and stuff like that. But then I was also had finished college, was working as a waitress, applying for grad school and wondering, what am I going to get into? I guess I'm going to get into entomology and study beetles like Art Evans had done, because he had gotten his PhD in dung rolling beetles in Africa. And I thought, okay, I'll do that. Well, out of the blue, talking about another door opening magically, I had a graduate student from the Department of Geography and Ecosystems who volunteered to help me in the application process for graduate schools. And I knew nothing about this. And I'm not, like I said, my family was a mess, so I didn't come from a background who knew anything about this. But this guy actually suggested to me, oh, you should apply to the University of Florida. And I'm like, really? Why Florida? He goes, oh, they've got more bugs than any other state. And I'm like, huh.
Can I pause right there? Can I pause you right there? Is that true?
Oh, yes. Because Florida has all of these Everglades and it's got kind of that wet sort of geology and stuff like that, they've got more insects than you could ever imagine, compared to the rest of the United States, because it's a lot more tropical climate
Mm.
than anywhere else. So I ended up applying there and several other locations, but out of the blue, I had one professor that I was going to go to work for, and he was going to have me study a beetle that really lives in cow pies and stuff.
Sure,
But
sure.
I didn't know the difference between one type of beetle and the other at that time. But I had another friend who got hold of me and said, Dini, you've got to have this professor write you a letter saying he's going to give you an assistantship. You need documentation that he's going to fund your research. So I call this guy up again and I say, look, I need a letter saying you're going to fund my research. And he goes, oh, I just lost my funding for another student, so I can't take you after all. And I'm like, what do I do now? Well, this graduate student who was helping me apply comes to me and says, have them circulate your file. And I'm like, what? So I call up Florida, the entomology department, circulate my file. I don't know what I'm saying. But out of the blue, then I have this professor call me. He goes, but, I see you are looking for a master's program. You've got to come here because we have a world famous sewage treatment plant. We're catching 8 pounds of American cockroaches a night. And I'm like, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard. I'm waiting tables in Malibu at that time. And here this crazy professor calls me about having cockroaches crawl up your pants. But then he says the magic words. He says, if you switch from beetles to cockroaches, I'll fund you all the way through the PhD.
Sold. Done. Enough
And
said.
I'm like, there you go. And I said yes. And he did write me a letter, promising the funding and everything. And I got in my 1972 Datsun station wagon and drove from Los Angeles to Florida. And from that day to this, that is still the best decision I have ever made.
Absolutely. Jeannie, I'm writing a movie.
Yeah, it was
I'm penning, I'm
incredible.
typing. I don't know if you can hear right now, but I am on the keyboard and I am typing. That story is inspiring,
Yeah,
truly.
and it's amazing, even to me, sitting here today, that how all these things sort of lined up. And one of the things that's been a blessing is that I got hired at Virginia Tech the same week that I graduated, okay,
Wow.
with my PhD. And I'd been studying German cockroach aggregation pheromone, which is aggregation pheromone is found in their feces. So I always tell everybody when I'm giving my extension talks, well, I'm really a German cockroach crap specialist. But I got hired up here at Virginia Tech, and since that time, I've gotten invited to speak all over the world. So I've been to every continent, I've been to all of these different countries. It's just, that was the best decision ever.
That's incredible. I am blown away by your experience. Can you tell me, and you kind of went into it naturally, about what your day to day looks like? It sounds like that it does involve a lot of travel, but
Yes.
yeah, can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, it's very diverse, and that's another thing that I've had to love about my career. There are days where I'm sitting there alone with the computer all day long writing, and writing grant proposals, writing publications and stuff like that, writing letters of recommendation for students. And that doesn't sound like the most fun. But the thing is, then compare that with I do a lot of field work where we're actually doing cockroach control or bedbug control in public housing authorities. So I'll spend whole days where I have to go into 30 cockroach infested units and count the number of cockroaches that are on the traps we put out the night before and putting bait out and things like that. I will be going into homes that are marvelously infested with 15,000 bedbugs and crawling under the couch or under the bed to take photographs or to put monitors in. So that's another part. Or I can be traveling to places like Bali, Indonesia, to go and speak to the pest control industry there about the research we've done. So it's a different thing just about every month. And also, because I'm 70% extension, my big chunk of my job is taking university research out to people who can use it as part of their job. And because bedbug infestations have gotten so prolific, I'm having to talk to social service organizations that are servicing the elderly. And here you'll have a whole group of people in there watching my presentation with these pictures of these infested apartments and homes and things. And they're like, how can people live like that? And I'll tell them the truth. And as soon as I say it, they know that that's the truth. And that is, these people have 17 other problems. And that includes financial issues, mental health, physical health, and whatever. And bedbugs are just one of them. And that's it.
So that's kind of, yeah, your day to day seems like it can go from in the field to the computer to literally crawling under beds, which sounds like my personal nightmare. But
Right.
I am glad there
But
are people like you who are willing to do that and keep people safe and healthy.
yeah. And I do teach classes and, of course, do a lot of training for people who need to know about bed bugs is the big topic right now because so many people are dealing with them. Like I mentioned, the social service organizations, but
Yeah.
also, there was a hospital up in Northern Virginia that their emergency room periodically they were bringing bed bugs in with the patients because they're lifting, the ambulance people are lifting them up on the sheets and putting them on the bed, rolling them in. And the administrative staff was located in the center of where they put the patients that were put in these little alcoves in the perimeter here. And one bed bug would show up, and then all the administrative people would decide that they would leave until there was a training, as if there wasn't going to be another emergency for the rest of the day. And a lot of my time these days is spent sort of talking people down about bed bugs instead of letting them just freak out. I'm like, this is just not something to be that scared of. And I'll give you an example. I was on the phone for 46 minutes today with a lady who is dealing with bed bugs. I'm like, don't let them get into your head, meaning don't get obsessed with them. And then
Mm.
she's like, they get into your head?
Oh
Really?
no. You have to be very literal when you're talking with somebody
Yes.
who's not, you know, thinking
Right.
straight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of people have just become obsessed. And, these are people that have lives that they can spend time worrying about a problem they don't have. And then the contrast with that is we've got a lot of people living with a ton of bed bugs because they've got 17 other issues, you know.
That's well said. And that kind of brings me to my next question. This is something that you and I have talked about previously, how you were saying how entomologists often are working with crops, pesticides, and the bugs. And you have said that when you add humans into this equation, that it actually becomes a social science. Can you expand
Totally.
on that? I think
Yeah.
that's really interesting and a very human aspect of the
Yes.
pest industry, really.
Yeah, well, most entomologists in my department work with agricultural crops because that's where the impact on people's income is. So if you're a farmer and you raise corn, you can go out there and look at the number of insects, corn earworms that you have in your crop at the beginning of the season and know that it might cost you might have so much damage at the end of the season that it's worth your time to go out there and apply an insecticide. Well, which insecticide? How does it work? All that sort of stuff. And so that's all science and economics, basically. Okay. When you're working in people's homes, though, people have a lot of strong feelings. For example, the farmer needs to reduce the pest population to what they call a manageable level, and that's part of integrated pest management. And that doesn't mean he gets rid of them totally. He just makes sure that he doesn't have so many that he's going to have damage to his crop. Okay. But what is a level of bed bugs that your mother would think is manageable? People tend, some of them, to freak out over the idea of even one bed bug or one cockroach. And at the same time, we have populations of people that are living with thousands of German cockroaches in public housing. And we've got a lot of elderly disabled people that are living with thousands of bed bugs. So again, it's like, what are the circumstances that cause you to live with thousands of them or freak out over the idea of even one? And again, that's the human. And the same thing kind of exists for pesticide use. I'm in Southwest Virginia, so if I go and I'm working in somebody's home, it's like, honey, you just do whatever it takes to get rid of them old bugs. I'll be over here cleaning my gun, okay? You just do what it takes. And then if I go to Northern Virginia, I'll have somebody, excuse me, are any of these baits or pesticides going to harm my dog? So there's a lot of different feelings that people have about either having insects in their home or near them, or having pesticides applied in their home and things like that. And it can be quite variable.
So, Dini, I know you and I have talked about this briefly before about your field research on German cockroaches in public housing. What were your findings there? It seems that they'll support what we were just talking about. And also, what how did you navigate that scenario? It's a lot of fun.
Well, it's interesting because the way that this got started is the way that I typically fund the people who work for me, my graduate students and everything, is doing sponsored research. So a chemical company might call me up and say, "Hey, we have a new cockroach bait and we want to see how well it works out in the field." So I had gotten, just like my advisor before me at the University of Florida, Dr. Kaler, I started working in public housing because they're just known to be plagued with these huge numbers of German roaches. So when I started working in public housing with baits specifically, I was told by the management, since we're not paying you, we can't ask the residents to do any cleaning. And what I had always heard forever, and everybody still says this, that if the residents aren't cleaning, then you tend to have cockroaches, right? And they also, if you're going to use baits in somebody's apartment, if there's competing food sources, meaning like there's grease on the stove or there's food from the dishes that's just been sitting out there for the week or something like that, and leftover food sitting around and stuff, that the cockroaches have all these other food sources. Why are they going to eat your bait? And we couldn't ask the residents to clean out their cabinets or anything like that because we weren't being paid as a pest control company. So, one of the things that we found out though is going out there, we started putting bait in wax paper squares that we folded on the diagonal. So, we call them the bait tacos. I'm from San Diego, so everything's got to be a taco, right? And you run the gel bait down the crease, and we could put those tacos in the cracks and crevices like the label requires, which is federal law, and yet we weren't contaminating surfaces. So we found that was advantageous just by accident, and we didn't contaminate anybody's stuff that way. And so we didn't have to have the resident clean things out so that there would be any risk of contamination. And not only that, we found out that all the baits that we have available these days, the cockroaches just love. And so they would come out and start eating the baits in their tacos even before we put them in the locations where we needed to put them. And we found out that by not disturbing the cockroaches, like not having the resident clean right before we get there and maybe scatter the cockroaches around or scare them or anything, but if we just came there and started giving them treats right in their cracks and crevices where they were hanging out, that worked really well. And we found out that we could eliminate German cockroaches using these different gel bait formulations. And everybody says, "Oh, what's the best one?" All of them worked. And you have to rotate them every 90 days because we know German cockroaches develop resistance and bait aversion very quickly. So you might kill off a bunch of one generation, but that you will select for these genetic mutants that can eat the bait or not eat the bait, okay, and survive it. One of the things we found out though, by rotating these baits and applying them in these bait tacos and not having the resident disturb them at all before we brought them snacks, that we could actually eliminate these populations. And especially if we did it during the winter time, because during the winter, we don't have these populations that are doubling, tripling, and quadrupling because they really seem to love each other during the summer months, even though they only live indoors. So that was really advantageous to really, we'd knock them out by December and then they wouldn't come back. And we'd go through the next summer and they wouldn't come back, even without the resident cleaning anything at all, which is contrary to what I had heard from managers and pest control operators my entire career. But we did have to be there every month. We put traps out overnight, one above the sink, one below the sink, and one behind the toilet. And then we would see how many roaches we caught overnight. And that would dictate to us how much bait to put out. Okay. And that makes a significant difference. We're not out there just guessing and putting out a few grams. In some places, we had to put out 2 tubes of bait. That's 60 grams because Our trap catch overnight was more than 1,300. That's how infested these HUD housing units can be. And that's because they haven't had pest control for over 30 years. They've only had pesticide application because HUD only pays, they paid $6 a door in Richmond housing in 2010 and paid $5.44 a door in 2020. And it takes an average of 49 seconds of the technician to get in the door. So to make any profit at all, he's got to be in and out of there in about 3 minutes. So he sprays some insecticide here in this crack and crevice and sprays it here and sprays it here and then on to the next unit. And then it's been very easy to say, well, the resident doesn't clean up. That's why we can't get rid of them. When in fact, they're only paying for pesticide application. And nobody's asking for any documentation that there's fewer cockroaches after treatment than there were before. And we've been able to demonstrate that, yes, we can totally get rid of them, and it doesn't take anything superhuman, but it is going to cost what it costs to get the job done. But I'd say that they've gotten a discount for the last 30 years, so it's time to actually pay.
Yeah, it's time to start taking care of people and taking care of
Yes.
the actual
Yes.
issue.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. I'm so happy that you did that and that you were able to do that research. It's sad that residents have to live that way
Yeah.
because of how expensive something might be. That's very difficult.
And it's 100% the responsibility of US HUD to pay for this, because we have the warranty of habitability in each state. So if you own a building that you rent to other people, it's your responsibility to get rid of the insects and stuff like that. Because if they move out, the bugs are still there. Cockroaches, German cockroaches, it's been documented for a very long time. Number one cause of asthma and allergies for inner city children. So we have a lot of these children, think about it, wintertime, close the place up, turn on the heat, and all this particulate matter from all the cockroach poops and shed skins and everything for the last 10 years start getting into the air and everybody's breathing it. So then asthma and allergies are a big problem in these facilities.
I never even would have thought of that. And like you said, it's something that you can eliminate and that
Yeah.
you can do. It just
Yeah.
takes money.
Takes money, it takes technician time, it takes the amount of bait, and I think it'd be reasonable for US HUD to require documentation from their pest control company that they have fewer cockroaches after treatment than before, or else they're not getting anything for their money. And I would say they haven't gotten anything for their money in a long time other than just being able to say, well, we pay for pest control, but they really don't.
I
Yeah,
think if they lived in those spaces, they might reconsider.
I agree.
It's
I
very
agree.
easy to be like, "Oh, it's their problem, not mine."
Right,
I think
right.
that that's how people operate, which is unfortunate, but I'm really so happy that you're doing that type of research and getting people to understand that it isn't necessarily about this secondary food source. It's really about doing your due diligence and seeing what is actually happening within the home and diagnosing it and taking care of it. Absolutely. Were there any other methods that you have discovered through your field research that you found to be interesting for others to know about?
Well, we're working on things with bed bugs now because that is just a huge, like I mentioned earlier, it's the plague of the elderly disabled now. Again, we have people who can't afford to deal with it and have so many other problems that the populations are just in the thousands in these individuals' homes. And I'd say I have made a huge effort over the last decade to try and find ways to eliminate these populations, but realize one of the problems that we have out there is the pesticides that we have that we're allowed to use indoors are about 50 years old. And again, we have, just like cockroaches, we have bed bugs that are like, spray me again, because we've selected for those individuals who are just not susceptible to these pyrethroid chemistries. So it's all the same type of chemistry, and that's really been a challenge. And so we're having to kind of fall back on methodologies like using vacuums and black lights. Using a black light will really help you see bedbug eggs, which is one of the challenges out there, because if you have bedbugs today, you might have a company that'll come in and treat your bedbugs, but they've got to come back in 2 weeks and do that about three more times, because you're going to have eggs hatching, and the eggs are not susceptible to any of the sprays that we have. So then you've got to come back after they hatch and treat them again. So in order to deal with these eggs, which are the greatest challenge because we just don't have anything that can penetrate the egg shell, um, we were looking at how do we approach these. Well, we started using literally a toothbrush in these homes to scrape the eggs because they're adhered to surfaces and stuff, and scrape those off and vacuum those up. So my technician is the one, when we were doing a study on bedbug feces, we actually found out that bedbugs produce black spots, brown spots, but then 55% more clear spots that you can't see with the naked eye. And while she discovered that with the black light, she also found out that these bedbug eggs really show up under the black light too. And so now we're looking at using this black light as a methodology of detecting eggs so that we can go out there and scrape them up and vacuum them up. But one of the new things we're going to be looking at this year, and we're going to be testing it, is using a heat gun. And there's heat guns out there, I didn't know this, that artists use frequently to engrave pieces of wood and things like that. And we have to be careful because you can't use a heat gun that's so hot that it's going to damage people's furniture or upholstery or things like that. But there are a couple of them out there that have their lowest temperature is 120 degrees. Well, 122 degrees is what's needed to kill eggs. So we're looking at using a combination now for inspection purposes of heat gun with the black light on it. So that will let us see the eggs and zap them as we see them. And
That's
hoping that,
cool.
yeah, and
That's
hoping
cool.
that would be a way of, instead of having to do this wait 2 weeks every time, that maybe we could get rid of a lot of those eggs in the first treatment, or
Yeah.
even the first inspection when you call somebody up to come and look at your home and see, I'm being bitten by something. Do I have bed bugs? That they could come and possibly use that black light to detect bugs that are there, at least the eggs and stuff, and see the fecal spots. So that would give them a clue as to what's there. And then if they find any eggs, go ahead and zap them right on site. Don't waste any time. Zap them today.
Yeah,
You know?
zap them today. I like you're
Yeah.
not only are you a scientist, but also a great marketer. Look at you go. Zap them today.
Yeah.
Deanie, I have one more question for you, but I do want to say thank you so much for sharing all of this knowledge because true, I'm learning a lot. And I just think that you're putting in the good work. You're taking good care of people and
Well, thank
sharing your
you.
knowledge is really important. And I thank you for that.
Well, I'll tell you, it's one of the things that makes it rewarding is feeling like, okay, let's find ways to make people's lives better, easier, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
know we were talking about people who have these very large infestations. It's probably not the top of their priority list to be able to deal with this.
Right.
And it is so wonderful that you're in their corner to help them and at least be able to solve that problem for them.
Well, we're working on it really hard because that's one thing we want to address, definitely.
Absolutely. So I have one last question for you, and I am interested. What do you wish pest control owners knew when it comes to training and supporting their employees?
Well, I wish, with as far as training their employees, I wish they were a little bit more, and this is not all companies, but certain ones are very conscientious on making sure that their technicians knew how to identify insects correctly, knew what terminology to use when they're writing things down, that they also had people that they trained how to communicate with customers. Because the thing is, like I mentioned earlier, we have so many customers that have no idea what we do or anything like that. And if these technicians could really communicate with them about what's going on, I think we would have a lot more respect for the pest control industry. But let me just give you a crazy example. So I got called by a woman who is in charge of military housing that was in Arizona, and she works for Safe Military Housing. Okay, that's what it's called. And she was talking about a particular location in Arizona that they had had a pest issue with cockroaches. And she said, yes, but the cockroach problem continues to go on. And she sends me a copy of the report from a pest control company that they had hired to come and take care of the cockroach situation. And what was written on the report was that the problem was baby sewer roaches coming up the pipes and getting into the bathtub. And when she's asking me about this, I'm having to tell her, and I feel, oh, this pest control company, why'd they do that? There's no such species as sewer roaches, no such thing. And we don't call them babies either. They are immature, nymph stage, something like that, but they're either oriental cockroaches, possibly American cockroaches, and what have you. But it kind of tells you in this report that it's written down that this company, or whoever the individual was, doesn't know one cockroach species from another. To call something baby sewer roaches, and you realize the pest control industry they need to be entomologists when it comes to indoor pests, and they need to be pesticide application experts and experts on the laws that regulate pesticide use, and experts even on public housing or rental housing as to who is responsible for paying for pest control and things like that, so that they can get accurate information out there. So it's not just about being able to kill bugs. There's a lot more to it. And it's very important, I think, for owners to make sure that their technicians are getting the education. They have to get continued education units on a regular basis, but to make sure that they are getting the education they need to interact with their customers accurately.
Yeah. And I think that it would even, if you're thinking of it as a business owner,
Yeah,
the better your employees are at communicating, the more efficient you can be.
right.
And it really comes down to efficiency and good communication skills.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You also have to have customers that believe in what you're doing rather than what I see on a regular basis is that most of the customers believe the answer is in the can, it's the pesticide, and you, the applicator, are irrelevant. Why not hire my dog to come as long as she's spraying the right stuff? This industry is a lot more complicated than that. Being able to identify what kind of pests, know what the resistance issues with those types of pests, know what is legal to use in certain environments, know what works the best based on what you're seeing in a particular situation. Because your home and my home would look totally different. We both had German cockroaches. Maybe the treatments would need to be somewhat different
Mm-hmm.
in what's used in there, but just saying, okay, this is what we use every time because this is what my boss said or whatever. We need to really get that education out there to our clients so they understand that there's a lot more to this than just coming in with some magic spray.
Absolutely. Dini Miller, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast, for sharing your knowledge. I am now very interested in having tacos for dinner tonight.
Good
Absolutely.
idea.
And I think everyone listening at home appreciates your knowledge and is also going to maybe make a taco or two for themselves.
Ooh, that sounds delicious. Maybe I'll do the same thing.
Yeah. And everyone loves a taco. Thank you
Yeah,
so much for
including
coming on.
roaches.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Thank you so much again.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. And it's really always makes me happy to kind of share this information with other people, about how we need to appreciate pest control and that we have the power to eliminate the pests, but the miracle is not in the can.
Yep. Well said. Well said.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.